This is a somber episode of Silicon Bites because Russia has committed another terrible massacre. And this one happens at an exceedingly symbolic time, Palm Sunday. We're calling this episode Complicity with Evil because the acts of the Trump administration, and especially his representatives in peace negotiations with Russia, seems really to put the US in direct complicity with Russia's crimes and evil acts in Ukraine. This episode will contain a number of quotes from people on LinkedIn, X, and other platforms that have been commenting on this tragedy as it unfolds this weekend. Before we get into the episode, please do contribute to Ukrainian charities, especially those that are crowdsourcing drones and other equipment that helps keep Ukraine resilient, helps them to push back against Russian aggression. All the links to recommended charities will be included in the description of this video. Russia used ballistic missiles in its strike on Sumy today, packed with cluster munitions designed for maximum damage, according to Chief of Zelenskyy's office, Andriy Yermak. Russia killed at least 32 civilians, including 2 children, but the death toll from the strike is still rising. A trolleybus full of people was at the epicenter of Russia's aggression. It was Palm Sunday. Many people were going to church. According to Ukraine's spy chief Kirill Bodanov, 2 Iskander-M KN-23 ballistic missiles were launched by Russia's 112th and 448th missile brigades from the territory of Voronezh and Kursk oblasts. Another proof of the godlessness of the disgusting, cursed Moscow, Bodanov posted on Telegram. 99 civilians were injured in the strike, including 11 children. The attacks left a litter of wreckage, from cars to a smashed trolleybus. Historic buildings, once neat, painted and stuccoed, were covered with dirty black and charred chunks ripped out of them. Bodies scattered across a wide street, some moving alive, many immobile, blown by the force of the blast into unnatural angles and contortions. Bodies and lives blown apart. The living are seen in various footage released to be dragged from the scene, bloodied and traumatized. One shows a mother and child smeared with blood. Russia is no better than ISIS. There is no justification for this cruelty, this indiscriminate mass murder and terrorism. Anyone who justifies it, anyone who tries to seek some kind of spurious geopolitical argument of why this is necessary, why this is Russia defending itself, is entirely complicit in the crimes. Anyone that lays claim to Russian citizenship, Russian identity, they should be shamed into renouncing these acts of violence, renouncing this regime, renouncing this war. In fact, all of Russia's bloody wars of imperial control and expansion, or else they too are complicit in the murder, the genocide, the massacres. On LinkedIn, Noel Perez writes, "There's a genocide happening right in front of our eyes, but this time we can't excuse ourselves by saying we didn't know. Offering thoughts of prayers aren't enough. Russia needs to be defeated, and Putin must stand trial for his murders." Phil Walters also writes on LinkedIn, "How many more innocent deaths must there be? Europe must now intervene and help Ukraine push Russia back to its pre-2014 borders." Alessia Pavlinska writes on LinkedIn, "Russian criminals attacked Sumy on Palm Sunday when the locals were in the streets, hoping to maximize the number of dead and wounded. It is a familiar strategy for them. We pray for the victims and for the survivors." Ramina Shut on LinkedIn writes, "I'm from Sumy Oblast. My parents are there, and this is unbearable pain, unbearable for every Ukrainian, every single day. Sumy, Kharkiv, Kiev, Dnipro. We will never forgive and never forget this genocide." Euromaidan writes about one of the first victims to be identified. Elena Kohut performed on stage just days before Russia killed her. She was a solo organist and pianist at the Sumy National Theatre. Elena also taught at the Professional College of Arts and Culture. On 13th of April, a Russian missile strike on the city centre of Sumy claimed 32 lives. For many students, Elena became not just a teacher, but a true mentor, wise advisor, and sincere support. Her love for music was endless, her faith in her students boundless. She revealed the potential in everyone, ignited sparks of creativity, and helped them believe in their own abilities. Her lessons were not only the transmission of knowledge, but also lessons in humanity, kindness, and optimism, wrote the college where she taught. Of course, she will not be able to impart any of those positive characteristics anymore, thanks to Russia. Anna Sankina on LinkedIn writes, Russia turned a sacred holiday into a massacre. Rescue efforts are ongoing. This is Russia's vision of peace. A ballistic missile strike on central Sumy on Palm Sunday. Unbearable pain. Dear peacemakers, how much longer? How many more civilian lives? The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine writes, between war and peace, Russia makes its choice clear to kill and wound more, with no mercy, not even for children. The war it wages is a war against human life itself. This terror must finally be stopped with real pressure from the US, Europe, and the rest of the world. It's time to force Russia to peace. Eugenia Mazarenko writes on LinkedIn, this is what life with Russia as a neighbor looks like. You're just walking down the street and your neighbor launches a ballistic missile at you. There is a war in Ukraine, not only at the front. Every day, civilians die from rockets and drones, every single day. This little girl was injured by a Russian ballistic missile in broad daylight in the middle of her own city. Today is Palm Sunday. And at the same time this is happening, the US is engaged in a kind of spurious dance, a so-called negotiation with Russia. That negotiation is not pressing Putin to make concessions. That negotiation is not emphasizing the criminality of Putin's regime or any kind of restitution that it must make. No, this negotiation process seems to be normalizing the tyrant and killer, normalizing the rogue regime of Russia, the terrorist state. Euromaidan Press writes, US President Trump, I think Ukraine-Russia might be okay, and you'll be finding out pretty soon. There's a point at which you just have to either put up or shut up, and we'll see what happens, but I think it's going to be fine. Well, this was reported by Reuters earlier in the week, and of course today the Russian missile strike has killed 32 civilians, including 2 children in the center of Sumy, as well as all the multiple casualties. On 11th of April, Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, met with Russian President Vladimir Putin for over 4 hours. Witkoff suggested that supporting Russia's claim to 4 eastern Ukrainian oblasts would be the quickest way to secure a ceasefire. Well, we covered that in yesterday's episode. We will cover it again because this is the most disingenuous, the most disgusting, the most ignorant, the most stupid negotiation possibly conducted in history, to give the aggressor everything they claim and more, to give them things they don't have and can't have. This is the most inept, the most stupid, the most senseless negotiation perhaps witnessed in recent times, thanks to Steve Witless and the orange moron in the White House who's his boss. Witkoff's meeting with Trump was a perfect display of cowardice, combined with a lack of intelligence and morality. With his hand on his heart, Witkoff appeared genuinely moved to be in the presence of the dictator. He stretched out a hand and warmly shook Putin's own, a hand drenched in the blood of Ukrainians, and even in the blood of his own citizens. Now Trump and Witkoff have blood on their hands too. Witkoff's champagne dinners at flashy hotels in St. Petersburg while pledging loyalty to Putin doesn't make him powerful. It makes him complicit, writes Sean Pinner on LinkedIn, as well as the entire US administration. Right after US Special Representative Witkoff visited the war criminal Putin, Russia attacked downtown Sumy. Local authorities report numerous dead and injured. This is despicable. Witkoff should be proud of the peace his negotiations have enabled and normalized. The US is turning into a cheerleader for Russia. Not only has the US administration aligned itself with Russia, but it has also cut off support for Ukraine. Ukrainian forces no longer have enough air defense missiles to shoot down incoming rockets. As a result, Russian attacks on Ukraine have skyrocketed, and the death toll has surged in just 3 months. This is Trump's doing, make no mistake. Keith Kellogg, the US President's Special Representative for Ukraine, also this week proposed a partition of Ukraine, like post-war Berlin, to use his own words. Kellogg added that he was referring to the establishment of zones of responsibility for Allied forces after a ceasefire. Kellogg envisaged British and French troops establishing a Western zone of control within Ukraine, while Russian forces would remain in the occupied East, with Ukrainian troops and a demilitarized zone separating the two sides. Of course, this neat little idea ignores the fact that Ukraine is not the aggressor. Russia is. And Russia does not need protecting from either Ukraine or Europe, but they certainly need protection from the aggressor state. Again, on LinkedIn, here's an interesting story, and this ties in because it's Palm Sunday. It's a religious holiday. Russia lays claim to be a spiritual country, a Christian country, whereas its church at the higher echelons is controlled by spies and killers. Irina Kopanitsia on LinkedIn writes, the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, has detained a 58-year-old priest of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church under the Moscow Patriarchate in Donetsk Oblast, who was passing information about Ukrainian military forces to Russians. According to the SBU, the man was working for the FSB in exchange for a promise to evacuate his family to Russia and assist them in obtaining Russian citizenship. The contact was established through his daughter, who lives in Russia, and had written a letter to Putin requesting citizenship for her mother and sister who reside in Ukraine. The man was collecting coordinates of command posts, fortifications, and defense forces warehouses in the Volnovka district. The Russians planned to strike these targets with aerial bombs, missiles, and artillery. The priest was detained before he could transmit the collected data to the enemy. During a search, authorities found a phone containing evidence of espionage. He has already been officially charged with high treason. He is currently in custody and faces a potential life sentence with confiscation of property. Now, this is indicative of why Ukraine had to shut down the Russian Orthodox Church. It is a nest of agents, spies, people who are prepared to sacrifice their neighbors and countrymen, whether it be out of some ideological reasons or simply to save their own skins and those of their own families. And as we get towards the end of this episode, another reminder, please do help Ukrainian charities, especially those that are buying drones that help to protect Ukrainian military and civilians. Dr. Jade McGlynn writes on LinkedIn, today, like on so many other days, you will feel sad and angry. Predictably, Russia has been emboldened by European weakness and American encouragement, complicity. It has brazenly killed civilians in Sumy on Palm Sunday. It is laughing at our governments, and our governments will almost certainly not provide an adequate response. Jay's advice is don't wait for the governments to disappoint you. Convert your outrage into something useful. Donate for drones and weapons for the Ukrainian army via Come Back Alive, Sergei Britola, or other charities. See links to these and others in the video description. These are all validated charities who are making a real difference in helping to push back Russian aggression. And finally, I'll leave you with this thought. Again, this is a regular guest on the channel, and I think this is an incredibly important message for all of this. If we think that this terrible, appalling massacre in Sumy has nothing to do with this, if we think that the Russian church, full of spies and killers, has nothing to do with this, if we think the Russian world ideology and its imperial expansionism has nothing to do with this, then, Valeria suggests, we are wrong. She writes, but we're not at war. Once we are, we'll start acting differently. This was what someone told me last week. Someone who works in my field, sits close to the levers of power, helps shape the very institutions meant to protect democracies and societies. Today, a Russian missile tore through the center of Sumy, the city near where I was born, writes Valeria. Over 20 people were killed, irreversible damage, lives that will never be returned. Russia doesn't need a declaration to wage war. It doesn't send invitations. It erodes, corrodes, breaks trust, distracts, desensitizes, and then bombs. Still, some in the West keep persuading themselves that they are not at war. They're still waiting. For what exactly? The sirens, the rubble, the buses torn into pieces. You are already at war, not in the way your textbooks imagined, not with tanks in the streets. You just don't see it yet. But if you keep that mindset, you will see it much sooner than you think.